to the Singularity Syndicate podcast. Today, we are joined by Dr. Cynthia Cook, adjunct professor of sociology at California State University, San Bernardino. She specializes in globalization, social demography, and the sociology of aging. In our conversation, we'll explore the implications of AI on the aging population. Let's dive in. Dr. Cynthia, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
All right, so today we're going to discuss this highly anticipated topic. I had a lot of people in our community, waiting to watch the recording and to listen to the podcast, because this touches home for many people. A lot of people are wondering, like, what does AI mean as I'm growing older? And also the aging population, they tend to be less tech savvy than the rest of the population, especially the younger generation. So there definitely have legitimate concerns there, and we're going to explore this with you. But before we do that, I would love to hear from you your journey into sociology and what makes you interested in aging and health disparities as a topic.
Okay, thank you. I'm an African American female. Okay, I grew up in New York City, Brooklyn, and Queens. My first job was at New York State Health Department, okay, up in Albany. And I was assigned to work with a research scientist on long term care. Now, you can imagine a 20-something-year-old being given long-term care to work on. And that particular, at that time, we had a program called NYSHA, New York State Health Utilization Review Program. And what we were primarily interested in at that time was whether or not hospitals were overutilizing their services primarily with Medicaid patients. We were also concerned whether or not hospitals were keeping Medicaid elderly patients in hospitals longer than necessary because they could not find a nursing home, a skilled nursing home, or a health-related facility. So that was probably my first introduction to aging. Okay, I started at New York State Health Department as a public administration intern. I then had the position of research assistant. I went on to become a senior research analyst, again focusing on the same thing. Whether or not hospitals, healthcare providers were overutilizing or underutilizing their facilities with Medicaid patients, being concerned whether or not because the patient was Medicaid, they did not get the same quality of care as a paying patient or a patient who had a different health insurer. So I did that with them for like about maybe almost 5 or 6 years. I then left and I went to work in Chicago. I worked for NORC, National Opinion Research Center. I had to remember what it stood for. It was so long ago. Okay. And again, there I was again working on long-term care aging projects. I left them after about a year and decided I wanted to get a PhD, wanted to do some graduate work because I was really a low life. Everybody who I was working with had a PhD, and I was just there with a master's degree. Okay, so I did go to the University of Chicago. I got my master's in sociology from them, and in fact, I was not planning on doing sociology. I was planning on doing the social services administration program. But then I met someone there who told me that I should apply to sociology. And I said, well, if I apply to sociology, I'm more interested in research methodology. He says, yeah, go ahead and apply. So I applied, I got in. And then, of course, my concentration was medical sociology. Okay. I left Chicago after about 2 years, did not finish the PhD. I finished the PhD at Texas Women's University in Denton, okay, North Texas. And I was not really interested in aging. It just happened, I did teach a sociology of aging course when I was at FAMU, Florida A&M University in Tallahassee. And I did do a study, and I know you didn't want all this, but while I was at FAMU from like 2008 until 2013. And that was when I became a senior. Okay, not with AARP at 50, but I didn't consider myself a senior until I turned 65 or 62 at that point. But I was amazed at some of the stereotypes students had about the elderly. They thought they were all going to be fragile, all going to be walking around with gray hair and sticks. And so I had like about maybe 300 students that semester, some in my introduction to sociology class, but some also in a sociology of aging class that I was teaching at that time. So I did a survey, in-house survey with them. And one of the questions that I asked them was, did you want to live to be 100? And the answers that I got was, when they said no, they said because you'll be fragile, you'll be old, you'll be crippled, you won't be able to do anything. And so I was really shocked that that was their perception of aging. Now, some of them were a little bit more positive. Some of them said yes, so that I could see my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, so that I could see all the changes that are taking place. But I think most young people had the perception that aging is a time of inactivity, fragility, and just you no longer being a productive individual in society. That is not true. Okay, I presently, and I know you didn't know this, but I presently live at an independent senior living facility in Riverside, and there are two parts to this. There's the independent part, where people live in single-family homes. They're independent. They don't need any type of assistance. They're active. They walk for 2 hours a day. They go to the gym. They're very active seniors. And then, of course, there is that senior population that needs some type of nursing care. Okay. But I think my interest in aging today has more to do with the fact that I am aging. And I also see, of course, that the baby boom population is aging. We've got about maybe almost 18% of the population that is 65 and older. Many of them are still very active. Many of them are out there. Many are still working, okay? Now, of course, the other side of this is that our younger population is dwindling, okay? The fertility rate is only like 1.7 for American women, okay? The natural increase, okay, the population natural increase is only like 0.1, which means that it'll take us 700 years to double our population. And so I think the problem isn't an aging population for the United States, for America. I think the problem is a dwindling working age population and a lower fertility rate. The fertility rate is less than the replacement level. The replacement level, of course, is 2.1, and we are at 1.7, okay? And of course, with everything going on in the world today and some of the policies or expressions that our leaders have expressed, who don't seem to realize that the reason why the U.S. population is still healthy is because of immigration. I mean, I was really annoyed with Trump, someone who knew absolutely nothing, who didn't realize that when our population grows every 10 years, the growth is not a natural increase. That increase in population usually has to do with migration. So I don't really see aging as a problem. I see the aging elderly senior population still being productive, still working. And yeah, the interest is there because I'm now a senior, okay? And I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that people are living longer, women are having fewer children, and I don't really like AI. I got to tell you that.
We're going to come to that. I'm just
Okay.
so
Okay.
um, you've touched on many interesting topics that I'd like to talk to you about. Personally, I'm very passionate about longevity, and I've been looking into a lot of, as you said, ways to not only extend my life to 100. I would love to live to 100 or beyond, only if my health span is as good. If I can continue doing the activities that I enjoy doing, then definitely long life would be something that we wish for all. But I think the people in your class had legitimate reasons to say no to longer life, because as they have seen probably in their lives that usually aging comes with a lot of health issues. And it's so sad because a lot of people live years in their late lives stuck to a bed and to a television. And this is probably why the perception is like, no, I don't want to live this kind of life. So before we go into all of this, I want to ask you to kind of like define in simple terms, what is the sociology of aging? We know that aging is a problem, is not necessarily a problem. Aging is a field of study, but what's the sociology angle to that field of study?
I think when we do the sociology of aging, we are primarily concerned with seniors, but we're also concerned with the other age groups. Okay, it's usually looking at all of the positive benefits of aging as well as some of the negatives. Okay, no longer being productive, friends passing on, loneliness, health care issues, income issues. So all of that is part of the sociology of aging, yes. But it's not just looking at seniors, it really is looking at the entire life course, okay, from birth all the way to the end. So all of that is part of the sociology of aging, but it is focusing primarily on the elderly population, yes. Does also get into a little bit of ageism, okay, and that is those negative stereotypes about the elderly. And yeah, basically that is it.
Can you linger more on this last piece, ageism and the negative connotations to aging?
I think, well, ageism and some of those negative connotations is some of the things that you sometimes see in the media, where the elderly person is perceived more as a joke than being a serious individual. A couple of years ago, they had this commercial, "Where is the beef?" Okay, and of course it was an elderly woman running around saying, "Where is the beef?" So I think that's what I also remember a couple of years ago when I was teaching in New York City, and I was talking. I'm trying to remember what I was talking about. But anyway, we got into Macy's. I'm not advertising for Macy's. But I said something like, people, Macy's may be setting the trend in terms of what you're going to buy on their commercials. And they said, and this stuck with me, and this was before I think I got to FAMU and did the study on aging with those students there. They said, the commercials, Macy's is always showing you all these young people shopping there. But they said, but young people can't afford to shop there. So when you go shopping at Macy's, you see all these middle-aged people. And I thought about that. And I said, they're right. When they do these advertisements, they like to put all these young people on. Now they've changed it. They've decided, and I didn't want to restrict it to Macy's, but normally when you're looking at some of the advertisements on TV, they always put a young person on, okay? And so now they are changing it, and they're giving you a mixture of young and old. They're giving you more diversity. So they're not just showing you that white male anymore. They're showing you other ethnic groups that make up the US. So it is changing. It's changing slowly. But of course, that would have been ageism with Macy's putting all these young people in who can't afford to shop there.
It's interesting that you touched on this one, because my background is in marketing, and I totally get it why brands like to show young people. It hits multiple birds in one stone. For one, brands care about the life cycle of the customer. So you want to target the younger customer, so that if you get a customer at a younger age, the idea in marketing is that you want to keep that customer. The lifespan of that acquisition is longer than if you, like, let's say, target an older customer. So I think this is where it's coming from. And then the second bird, or the second element to that, is the fact that even older people have aspiration to remain young and to feel young. So if you put like younger individuals in your ads, then like the people will say, okay, if the younger generation are wearing this, I want to go and wear it as well, so I can appear younger. So there's that, probably an explanation that I can offer you from my background in marketing. But
of course,
go ahead.
Perception, because I think what they're doing is they're saying, if you buy my product, you'll look like this. And we all know that's not true. Okay, they're saying these are the type of people who buy my products. So if this is the image that you were looking for, then shop here, buy this product. But the reality was that the people who could afford to shop there were older. Okay. But the other thing about ageism, I'm sorry with the phone. The other thing about ageism is that it doesn't just apply to the elderly. Okay. It may have been a term that was originally coined to apply to the elderly, but it also applies to young people, because ageism is really about discrimination against a person because of their age. And so there are many young people who say that they too get discriminated against because they don't have the experience, okay, or they don't have the skill. But most of the time when we're talking about ageism, we really are talking about discrimination against the elderly. So
that's great. Fantastic. I want to linger back on what you said in the introduction about the health span issue, as well as the growing population. So before, for preparing for this episode, I went to YouTube and I was watching the different studies and work there. Surprisingly, and this is very good for us, is that I didn't find anybody who's concerned about the intersection between technology and AI and aging. So this is probably a unique opportunity for us to be discussing this topic. But other areas that talked about, like as I said, the health span versus the lifespan, and then they mentioned that there are three type of countries today. There's the wealthy first countries, Japan, United States, and Northern Europe. These are the ones who are seeing highest number of aging population. And as you mentioned, the fertility is not replacing the population. So these countries are dependent on migration to fill in the work gap that they have. And then there's the poor countries who have a high fertility rate, and then have also high mortality rate in the aging population. So What can you say about this dynamic and what I've touched upon?
Okay, so first I would say very few people are going to probably make it to 100. Okay, but that was just the age that I used for this particular group of students. Okay, I think for the United States, the life expectancy is about maybe 78 for men and 81 for women. But of course, that is changing because people are living longer. They are healthier. They have started in their youth with a good diet, good exercise. And so as they age, I think the objective is for people to age healthily. I don't think we can afford to have a large elderly population with a lot of health issues, with a lot of chronic health issues. So I think we have to work on improving that, not only for the elderly now, but for the next generation coming behind them. Okay. And that is because we probably will have a shortage of care workers. Okay. Now, when we look at the demographics, it is your high income countries like the United States, Western Europe, Japan, Singapore, Korea, South Korea, where the fertility rate has gone down. The population growth rate has gone down. And even China is concerned about not so much their population growth, but the fact that they will have a large elderly population and will not have that large working age population that they had that supposedly improved their economic development. Okay, that whole demographic dividend for China had to do with a large working age population that was very productive. What we're seeing, and this is all part of that migration, people moving from the south to the north, is that there is a high fertility rate in many of your low-income countries, okay? And many of those low-income countries are going to be in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, okay? There's a high fertility rate, there's a high birth rate, but they also have a very small elderly population. So that when you're looking at Africa, only about 3% of the population there in 2022 was 65 or older, okay? So they've got a young population where the median age could be 15, 18, where that just means that more than 50% of the population is under the age of 18, which is good, okay? We've got we have a median age of about 38, 39, which means that half the population is under age 39 and the other half is older, okay? But also when you look at the number of children being born between 0 and 5, those cohorts, they're relatively low, okay? So I think what we're seeing, and what we see this already, when we look at the caretakers, okay, if they're not family members, they're usually immigrants. They're usually people who have migrated to this country, okay? So what we're seeing is that the South, okay, Latin America, Asia, Oceania, Africa, they have a much younger population, okay? Unfortunately, many of those regions, those areas, don't have the economic opportunities available for that young population. So they are going to be migrating, okay? They migrate once they get their degrees, they migrate any chance they can get because there are more opportunities outside their country. Go ahead.
It seems that there's a trade here, and there's a trade between the high income and low income countries. The low income countries are producing people, and then they export the talents to the high income country who are not producing as many people. If I want to put it in simple terms.
We put it in simple terms, and today Western Europe is more receptive to immigration than what it was 20 or 30 years ago, because their population, their working age population is in decline. We are still struggling with our immigration policy, okay? But I think our politicians are playing to a certain population that may not know as much as they should about population growth, okay, especially in the US. Um, it's a trade off, but it's a trade off where the West benefits but not the East or not the North. And I say that because then we get into the brain drain. Okay. And then there's another term. We get their best, but then we have to put money into these countries to help develop them because we took that brain power that could have been used to develop the country where they came from.
That's
The problem, of course, that when people are migrating, it's because of instability, it's because of violence, it's because of persecution. So they're being, it's that whole push-pull theory. They're being pushed out. Most people don't want to leave their homeland, don't want to leave their country to go someplace new. They would prefer to stay at home if the opportunities were there, if it was a safe environment. So yes, we're reaping the benefits of those countries because they have not been able to stabilize. They have not been able to provide the education and economic opportunities that their population needs, which would help them to develop quicker.
it's interesting that you say that that you believe that migration is an asset to the high income countries, because myself, like, I just moved to the United States 2 years ago, and in my head I'm like, I'm so grateful that I come here, and my country is Lebanon, is a corrupt country. There's like so many bad things happening there, and I for me, like, it's a great opportunity to be living in the United States. Of course, I'm doing my very best to contribute and make my stay here meaningful and helpful and valuable to the host country. But it's also a great opportunity, as you said, for me, because of I'm coming for better opportunities and better quality of life, and this is exactly why we come here. So I want to shift now the conversation to your field of study. And what have been your research in your PhD? What are you currently involved in terms of research in that matter, before we head into AI in the last section?
Well, my research has focused on health disparities, both global and domestic. My dissertation was on reducing maternal mortality in the developing world, focusing on sub-Saharan Africa. I still delve into that research, try to update it now and then. I also did research on traditional birth attendants. Basically, that was part of the dissertation too, seeing about training more traditional birth attendants so that they are better able to provide care to pregnant women and make sure they have contact with healthcare facilities so that if there are any complications, women can be referred to them immediately, and that would help to reduce some of the mortality in the developing world, specifically in sub-Saharan Africa, because I think they have the highest maternal mortality rates. Afghanistan is very high, but Afghanistan is due more to the conflict within the country.
Right.
So that has been my research. The cultural competency was done when I was at Creighton, and we were concerned that we had certain groups, the Sudanese and the Vietnamese, and that there were some issues that had come up with the Vietnamese child. The teacher noticed that he had these red circles on his back, and so she immediately called Child Protective Services, which meant that the child was removed from the family. And of course, those red circles were, what do they call them? Cupping or coining, a traditional healing practice which does not signify abuse. And so the family was upset, the community was upset at that point because they had to go into court, and they had to hire an interpreter because the family didn't speak English. And so as a result of that, and another incident with the Sudanese family there, we decided to do a study on cultural competency to see whether our healthcare providers were, I'm going to use the term culturally sensitive because it's a little bit, derogative to say competent. So we're very careful about not saying competent. Our study said cultural proficiency, not wanting to offend anyone. So we were looking to see if they were culturally sensitive to the when people came in. They didn't have to know the Sudanese culture, the Vietnamese culture, the Hispanic culture, the Native American culture. But we wanted to know whether or not they were sensitive that these people may come in with different perceptions of their illness and what they expect from their providers. So we also asked the population, the Sudanese, the Vietnamese, Native American population, they're African American, Hispanic, and we had to include the white population. We asked them whether or not they thought their healthcare providers were culturally sensitive. And many of them said no, okay? Many of them talked about the fact that they did not speak English and that they were sometimes told, learn English. Others were upset that some of their women were being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorders. As far as they were concerned, that was saying they were crazy. So there were a lot of miscommunications going on. So that was the cultural competency study that we did at Creighton. And what it ended up doing was making sure that they had more training programs to make sure providers were familiar with some of the processes. So that is my research in the past that I've done, as well as
Awesome.
I did one on childlessness and women over 40, as well as the aging study. So.
No, absolutely. You have an incredible track record, Doctor. I did my research, so I'm very honored to have you on the program. As we are talking, we have people commenting in the chat. Sam says that I was happy to learn that a friend of one of my old clients informed me last week that she was using ChatGPT. She's not tech savvy, but she found the tool easy to use. And this is something going to be relevant to our AI section of the talk. And also we've got Rodney saying that this is a very needed discussion. Thanks for taking the lead for creating the dialogue. Well, thanks to both Rodney and Sam. And with this, I want to touch upon, your research is focused on health disparities and aging disparities between different countries and globally and all of that. What would you see the breakthrough in this field? Where do you see the opportunity here? Like, what would be, if I tell you, like, imagine you have a magic wand and you can, shake that magic wand and got whatever biggest problem of these disparities solved, what would you solve?
I think the problem is economics and education. I think we see that there is a relationship between the health of a population and education. And all of that goes hand in hand with economics, okay? More developed countries have higher life expectancies, but more developed countries also have the majority of their population being educated, whether that means having a high school diploma or being literate. Okay, so when we're looking at when I'm looking at health disparities, I can usually look at the gross national income per capita of a country and pretty much predict whether or not there is a high maternal mortality rate, a high infant mortality rate, and also figure out that looking at the gross national income, whether the causes of mortality are infectious and parasitic diseases or if they are chronic diseases. So that disparity that we're looking at, we use this term diseases of affluence or degenerative diseases. So your high income countries, the majority of the population, the causes of mortality are degenerative diseases of affluence. That's going to be diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, cancer. Those are the chronic diseases, okay? But those are the diseases that do not materialize until you're at least over 40 or 50. then people start having problems with hypertension, heart disease, cancer, diabetes. Okay. Your low
Right.
income countries, the concerns are pneumonia, malaria, yellow fever, oh, colds. Yeah. So they're more malaria. What else is out there? I'm trying to HIV, AIDS. Okay. And notice I didn't say HIV, AIDS for the high income countries because we have access to those antiretroviral drugs. But there are still many places in Southern Africa where they don't have access to it. Okay. Uh, and so the other
Right.
problem is that once you educate the population, then you can have more healthcare workers. And if you have more healthcare workers, then you have more people to provide healthcare services to the population. But it isn't all about healthcare because that demographic transition that we saw in the high income countries that are high income today, uh, that was the result of economic development. That was the result of people eating better and safer working conditions, okay? And better nutrition reduced the maternal mortality rate, it reduced the infant mortality rate, and it caused people to live longer because they were healthier, okay? So it's kind of like a combination of things. What you really want to do is improve the economic well-being of the country and hope with reputable governments that it will filter down to the people, okay? And making sure that people have an adequate diet, access to health care when they need it, and jobs, okay? And I think that is what many of these low income countries. And the last thing, of course, is you have to educate women, okay? You have to include women. They have to be educated because women are the ones who care for children. And what we have found is that educated women are more likely to take their child to a healthcare provider for the least little thing, okay, and therefore have a higher survival rate. Okay, so you need women, okay, you need to educate them.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I noticed that you mentioned in the beginning of the podcast that you are on the kind of opposing side of AI. And now when I asked you like what are the biggest issues, and it all boils down to economy and education, and especially education of women. And I would love this podcast to switch now into kind of like a debate where basically I'll be the one defending the technology and AI, especially because I'm like obsessed with it, and then you will be the devil's advocate, which means that, or maybe a better choice of words here, but you get my point here. Like we're trying to have like an interesting intellectual debate where we can look at the pros and cons of technology, and I'm sure that even AI has a lot of cons and a lot of concerns and ethical problems, and we're going to delve into that, but we're going to show both of them. But before that, I always ask my guests, when was the first time you saw ChatGPT or you start interacting with ChatGPT, and what was your impression?
Okay, so I am not interacting with ChatGPT. I'm not doing it at all. I'm familiar with it, but I'm not using it. Okay, um, I think being a sociologist, we have always been concerned with large data because we know that the more data you have, the more reliable the results. Okay, so always for large data sets. When I worked at New York State Health Department, we had all the Medicaid form from all over the state. We had a large data set that we were working with, okay, that we were trying to identify some of those aberrant practices. So I think the large data set is great. I think the problem that I have moving away from chat, because I really have not used it, I've read everything about it and how people are concerned that it can be easy for students to have this machine program write their papers. But I tend to give the type of topic that it would be very difficult for a computer to write. Okay, so I just got finished reading about the strike in Los Angeles and what their concerns were and how they settled. They were afraid that they were going to have AI or chat PT, what is it, PGT, that it would be writing
GPT.
their, what is it, GPT, chat GPT,
GPT, yeah.
that, yeah, that it would be writing the scripts for the, for the sitcoms, for the series. And so I can understand that. And then the article was also saying how sometimes it does a really good job in terms of turning it out very quickly, but not as good as the original authors and writers. Okay. So I understand the benefit of it. And I know it will probably become the norm in a number of years, in about 10 years, regardless of all the criticism and complaints. You cannot stop progress. I already know that. So it's here, it's here to stay, and it may depend on how you monitor it, how you regulate it, but it's here, and it is something that the next generation, young people, will utilize. They will utilize it. Okay, like Google. Like when you ask them a question in class, the first thing they do is Google it and give you an answer. Okay. But so it's here. It's here to stay. And I think when that happens, I usually say, well, what else is related to you? You gave me the answer, but why is that the answer? What's going on? What's the background to it? And I think that may also be with Chat GPT. Okay, so I think you
Got it.
still have to do research, and from my understanding, on a couple of um, Zoom meetings that I was on where they were using it, they said it wasn't as accurate. Okay, that when you gave it a topic, it sometimes made mistakes. And I can understand that because I know that it all depends on how much data has been put into the system in terms of how it's going to respond.
Yeah. So you've done a great job in tackling the limitations of ChatGPT, which, by the way, ChatGPT is very much as you described. It's a large data set. The only difference is that this data set is human generated text. So basically, what they did is they created a computer program that that consumed hundreds of millions and billions of letters and text, and it kind of found a pattern in this text, and this pattern helps you predict the next word and predicts the next sentence, and all of a sudden we have a computer program that can write based on all the text that it has received on the internet. So it knows about a wide array of topics, but it knows basically on a statistical significance. So, for example, if the majority of people, let's say, are pro-abortion, for example, so the computer program will rank pro-abortion sentiment high, and it will start producing text that is pro-abortion. So that's where also the concerns on is bias. For example, if the data set that has been consumed by ChatGPT has inherent bias in it against, for example, African Americans, because against women, against transgender, all of that stuff. So this bias will become embedded within these technologies. Now, of course, needless to say, like this is the thing that all of these big companies who are producing such technologies are working hard on this problem, and they're trying to tackle all sorts of bias and ethics within the generation. Because remember, language is a catalyst of information. It's language is a fundamental to human thought. So if a machine is producing language, as you rightly said, that it become the norm to expect that text is coming from a machine. So so at the same time, though, although we fully understand the limitations, I want to say, okay, The two biggest problems you mentioned related to aging, economics and education. And I could easily see that technologies like ChatGPT and large language models are fundamental to improving opportunities, economical opportunities for people at the bottom of the of the income level, and I can always see it as an educational helper. The only difference is that instead of giving assignments that ChatGPT can produce, we have to think in a more creative way of how we teach our children and our students. So it definitely have big implications on how we teach. And I know that you're an educator, so it's definitely I can see your frustration by lecturing and putting your heart and soul into trying to make a student learn a concept, and then the student will lazily just go to ChatGPT and copy and paste that answer, and it's really hard for you to figure out whether it's a machine generated or a human generated, because this technology can replicate what humans can say. So the question for you is, first of all, do you recognize the opportunities, as well as if you have anything to comment on what I just said?
Um, well, I recognize that it is a tool that will be used, okay? But in the classroom, the way I usually check to see whether or not someone is the original author of something is you start asking them questions about what they wrote, okay, and why they wrote it. And then, of course, you need to have references. So I don't doubt that there will be some students who will use Chat GPT. Yes. However, I think we have all been introduced to Chat GPT when we are writing our emails, and all of a sudden the next word pops up, and it may not be the word that we want, okay, but it pops up immediately. Or when after we've written something and we've sent it out and someone said, well, what did you write? Why did you say that? And you realize that the machine changed it, not you. And so you have to say, no, that is not what I said. I didn't put that word in there. Okay. So I think that is also an issue with Chat GPT. The grammar. Okay. I used to teach English as a foreign language, English as a second language. I know the way you punctuate something can change its meaning. The way you put the words down can change its meaning. But more important, the way you punctuate something can change the actual meaning in terms of what you want to say. So that when I am reading a paper and I start to punctuate, then I have to say to the writer, is this what you meant? Because I just added some punctuation that I think you left out, okay? Or I just changed the word. Is this exactly what you meant? I think I get that a lot with students on a more elementary level when they write something and they've used spell check, and spell check gave them the wrong spelling for a word. So I kind of like see, I'm sure the kinks are going to be ironed out of Chat GPT, but I'm still a little bit skeptical, and I'm hoping that there will be those students who want to be creative and not use Chat GPT. My hesitation, it's almost like students are not doing well in math because they're too dependent on the calculator. Okay. Growing up, we did not have a calculator. Okay. You had to sit there and do the math yourself. Okay. You go into a supermarket, all of the cash registers are programmed. So you give them the money, they put it in the system tells them how much money to give you back. They don't know how to do the arithmetic. Okay. And so I think that will also be a problem with Chat GPT, that if you are depending on a program to write something, can you write something when the computer breaks down? Okay, like my other PC is not working. I have seen situations where the computer goes down in a supermarket and everybody's just standing around. They can't do anything. And you say, why don't you just, do it by hand? They don't know how. Okay, everything has been so. That is my concern about chat GPT. That is
ChatGPT.
also my concern about AI. Yeah, yeah, that we become too dependent on the technology. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's like imagine Google's going down. I think we expect it right now to be on all the time, and the more people use it, the more people depend on it, and it becomes the norm. Just like Google, just like the internet, we take our phones and we expect that there's signal on the phone, right? Like we don't really question that, um, and I think people will get adjusted to that. But I believe personally that people this is a technology as big as the internet. This is revolutionary, this is transformative, and it's important. In all my surrounding, my friends and my family, I'm always telling them, adopt early, adopt the technology as early as you can, because the people who are adopting it early are going to see 10 times productivity improvements, and they're going to see a lot more creative ways to interact with this machine. Because remember, when you mentioned about they can copy and paste their assignment, the student can copy and paste their assignment. Well, yes, but this is only one way to use it. Like you could use it to brainstorm ideas and then write them in your own hands. I am in my master's thesis right now, and I am, I'm in the data analysis section of my thesis. But it was very helpful for me when I'm writing my literature review. It didn't mean that I gave it, oh, write my literature review and it will write me. No, of course. But it helped me find relevant studies, find relevant papers. It helped me also summarize. So instead of like reading a lot in the paper and discovering that, oh, this is not relevant to my research, well, you could upload this entire paper, hundreds of pages, into ChatGPT. It will give you summaries and it will give you, is it relevant to my research or not? Should I read further or should I stop? So this is just new ways of using it as a tool for good, in my opinion. But again, just like the nuclear energy, right? Like you could use it to power cities with electricity, and you could use it to create an atomic bomb. I think the same applies to ChatGPT. What do you say about that?
I think you said you were using it as a reference tool. Okay, allowing the chat GPT to write a paragraph with the references for you to go and check and decide if this is something you want to further explore. I think in that capacity, it would be positive. But we do the same thing when we go into the library's database and we read the abstracts and we decide which articles are pertinent to our research, which ones we do not. But we become familiar with all of them. But we're doing it ourselves. Now, let me just say this, as I said before, it's progress, it's going to stay. When I did my first thesis at Brooklyn College in 1973, 74, I had to go to the 42nd Street Library. I had to go to the Schonberg Library. I had to go to Columbia University's library. And I had to find the articles in the journals, in the stack, take them out, make copies, have enough dimes to make copies of the articles, and then go home and read them all. And it was set up so that there was an abstract book. So you had to go through the abstract book to see which articles you wanted to read. And then you had to write down all the information. And then you had to go and find the journals, okay? And then take them out and then make copies. Now, I look at students today and I try to tell them, you have got it easy. You don't have to sit there and go through a card catalog. All you have to do is go home, turn on your PC, get into the library's database, put in your keywords, and everything comes up. Okay. Yes, it's progress. We went from having to look at card catalogs, going to 3 or 4 libraries to get articles, to being able to sit at home and have a librarian, send you an electronic copy of an article that is not in their database, but they got from someone else. So it is progress, and I recognize it. And you're right, those who adopt it immediately will benefit the most. Okay. But we still have that digital divide. We still have people who don't have access to the internet. We still have young people during the pandemic. There were many young people when the schools shut down. They didn't have access to the internet. They had to have their parents drive them to a library's yard, campus, to get onto the internet. So we are still at the divide in this country, that there will be those who will benefit from chat, GPT, and AI, and then there will be those who are left behind. So again, when we're talking about disparities, whether they're health disparities, economic disparities, or educational disparities, the people who will benefit the most and who are benefiting the most from AI are those who did adopt it soon. But then again, we have those who do not have access to the resources to allow them to benefit. Okay. And I know we're almost out of time. I know that. But there was the other thing when you were talking about aging enhancement and for the elderly. And when you have Singularity, and my first introduction to Singularity is a type of AI enhancement, computer enhancement to certain parts to keep people functioning. And I think even if we go in that direction, if we come up with some prosthesis, some pill or something that enhances people's intelligence or helps them to be a little bit more mobile, I think, again, we're looking at those who can afford it and those who cannot. Okay, so even with respect to the elderly, the technology, it's the best example is designer babies. Who can afford designer babies? The wealthy. The average person is not going to have a surrogate carry her child for her for 9 months, but the wealthy will. They will hire someone to carry it. And so we're back to the disparities. But AI is here. It's not going anyplace. Chat GPT is here. It's not going anyplace. It is just how we use it and whether or not we use it all responsibly.
Definitely. I just want to say yes. I mean, most of technologies, they start with being expensive and not accessible to the majority of the people. But as they grow, they proliferate and then they become accessible to everyone. And I think right now, and part of my mission personally with Singularity Syndicate, with this podcast, and with the other community that we have, is to try to bridge that gap, try to make sure that we have an inclusive society, even with technologically inclusive society. And that's really my mission with doing this podcast and having it focused on AI and solving, how the problems that or the challenges that are faced by this technology. I have Rodney says again in the comments. He said the two industries will be disrupted is education and medical. And for here, I want to also say that ChatGPT has been very good tutor for me. Like if I have any difficult project or if I have difficult a concept that I'm not grasping, I can tell, hey, ChatGPT, explain this to a 5 years old. And then it will start step by step explaining that concept. And I find it very helpful in being my teacher and my tutor as I want to learn anything. So Rodney is right about the disruption on education. The other part is medical. I'm seeing, because I'm in the field, I've been seeing a lot of people saying that, well, I went to this doctor and this doctor and this doctor, and they said that I have this disease. And then I asked ChatGPT, and ChatGPT excluded those diseases and suggested something else. Again, I'm not trying to tell the listeners right now that they should depend on ChatGPT for their medical diagnosis, because it's not ready yet and it has some accuracy issues. But what we're trying to say here is that in the future, you're looking at saving lives. You're looking at having access to medical diagnosis or treatment tools for people in Africa and for people as poor as they could get. As long as they have an internet connection, they might have a superior knowledge, and they might have superior medical advice. And that itself is really tackling your area of research, tackling disparities. So this could also be solved as a disparity issue. Another area I want to touch upon is during COVID, you've got thousands of elderly people who have died in their nursing homes or in their homes in front of their television without any loved ones around them. And um, and the reason is that also because of elderly people usually are not tech savvy. So they would be like, oh, they don't know how to use the phone properly. They don't know how to message their family or their loved one. So with this technology, especially because it's natural language, and this is my research, is the efficacy of natural language conversational artificial intelligence, is that these elderly people will have access to talk in their natural language with the machine and tell it, oh, call my son, or let's or send a message to my son, or whatever. So it you can, all of a sudden, you don't need the device anymore, because the machine can understand your natural language, and you're basically conversing with your PC, you're conversing with your phone in natural language. You don't need to put on your glasses and start dialing, or touch and point and click. Now this technology will enable natural language communication, and I think this is also a powerful way that will help in the aging population. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think that technology is here. That's Alexis, okay, that many people have and use. But I think you're right. You do have to educate the elderly on how to use it. So I think AI, when it comes to medicine, I think AI is very helpful. However, I am concerned that we may be reverting people to a number. Physicians and providers like to say, well, there's a 99% chance, there's a 70% chance of this and that, and I don't think, well, for myself, I don't want to hear about there's a 70% chance. I just want to know what my chances are, and not what happened with 70 other people, because then I want to know, what about the other 23%? What's going on here? So I think you're right. The more data that is available to medicine, the more accuracy their diagnosis, but again, making sure that they look at the whole person and not just the data. It's going to be useful, yes. It's the future, yes. It will aid people in many developing countries if they have access to the internet and not to a physician or specialist, where they can get that information immediately and not have to travel thousands of miles. Yes, it is going to be beneficial, especially in low income developing countries. Yes. So my criticism is that we sometimes oversimplify everything, and there is the opportunity for abuse, and it will malfunction. It will not be completely accurate. And of course, the accuracy is also depending on who's putting in the information and who's operating the machine. So,
Absolutely, I agree. And the last question about knowing, AI is here and AI is here to stay. What would you give in terms of advice to high schoolers who are just starting their life? Do you recommend going into the field of sociology? Do you want Like, what is your advice to these kids?
I already know you do not major in sociology unless you are interested in doing research, unless there is a social issue that you want to solve or address. I usually tell students in a freshman sociology class that the areas to go into are healthcare and science and information technology. I should say that I learned a lot of what I know about AI from having worked at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute for about 4 years. And when I got there, I knew absolutely nothing about AI and robotics, but my students knew a lot and they shared that information with me. They gave me articles, and I'm sure I'm talking about undergraduate students who are very much into robotics and AI. So I got to learn a lot, read a lot because I had to catch up because this is the area that my students were in. So I needed to try to know almost as much, if not as much as them, because they were working with this stuff, 24/7. This is why they came to RPI. So I would tell young people the areas to go into are science and math. Those are the areas for the future, and information technology. Regardless of what I think about AI, it is the future. It will stay. It's not going anyplace. And I would want them to be ethical in everything that they do and take into consideration that people are not machines. People are human beings. They have feelings. And yeah, I would say math and science is the area to go into.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm having a podcast, and I I could technically interview the machine. So today we have ChatGPT. I could technically simulate ChatGPT into a voice recorder, or like make it speak, and I could literally sit down and talk to ChatGPT. But that's definitely not what humans do. Like, we love to connect with human beings, and you are such a wonderful person to talk to, Dr. Cook. I am honored and very pleased to have this conversation with you. I thank you for your time. You've been, I think a lot of people will see the or will listen to this conversation and find it very inspirational and insightful. I think the issues that you touched upon and the insights that you added are very much valuable to the general public. And I want to thank you for your time. And if you have any last words.
I want to thank you for inviting me. This has been an interesting experience for me because it is the first time that I have done a podcast. So thank you very much, Mr. Fasal, for inviting me to be your guest today.
My pleasure. Have a great